Hi everyone. So far in the course, we've talked a lot about computer hardware. We've talked about the big five, the five computer hardware components you need to run a computer. And then we've talked about a few other things that you can put inside a computer, things you can attach to a computer, input-output devices. Um, but we haven't talked at all about software yet. And so I thought I'd introduce it with a story of my youth. One of the things I remember doing for the first time ever was actually building a computer. My parents were kind enough to order me all the computer parts that I needed, and I was going to build my computer from scratch. So I found a website, and there's all kinds of these websites out there on how to build a computer. And if you look down here, you'll see all the things that we've talked about. Here's all the stuff that this person is saying you need to build a computer, and they all look familiar. There's a DVD drive, and that looks like a hard drive. There's a motherboard, the case, obviously, which we didn't necessarily talk about too much, and then you scroll down and you can see step one, install the power supply. We talked about the power supply. That's a very nice looking power supply. And so that's step one. And then it talks about installing a processor. So there's the processor that we talked about, the brain of the machine. And there's lots on the processor. And then down here, hey, there's RAM. We talked about RAM. You have to have RAM inside your machine. And we can go further. There's motherboard. Put the motherboard in the machine and so forth. So there are lots of sites about building a computer and putting together all of those parts. And it's fun and it's kind of rewarding at the end. But when I was young and I built my first machine, I remember I put it all together and then I turned it on and nothing happened. And that's when I realized, oh my God, I forgot to get an operating system. So you can put all the hardware together, but if you don't have what's called an operating system to run the computer, it renders it pretty useless. Most people don't have to worry about this. Most people are not building their own computers. Most people go to the store and they buy a computer and it has an operating system preloaded onto it, usually Microsoft Windows. But for me, I actually had to go online and I had to find an operating system. And when I say find, yes, I did buy one, but you don't have to, as we're going to talk about. So operating systems are the most important piece of software that you're going to buy or have for your computer. And without an operating system, your computer will turn on and it will boot. It will probably flash a few lights at you, but it really won't do very much else. And so an operating system could be argued to be the sixth member of what we used to refer to as the big five. Because my definition of the big five, the reason I called it the big five computer parts, is that you have to have all of them in order for your computer to work. And when I was teaching at Sydenham a while back, I had a student put up their hand and said, well, shouldn't an operating system be part of that? And I thought about it for a long time, and he made a very good point in that you can't really do anything with your computer without an operating system. So an operating system, though it's not a piece of hardware, one could argue that it would be part of what we call the big six, because you can't have a computer doing much without an operating system installed on it. So let's take a look at some of the most popular computer operating systems out there. This is what I get when I type in operating system. And this is the one that most people are going to know right off the bat. Even if if people don't know computers, when you say Microsoft Windows, most people know Windows. Most people have worked with Windows. Most people have Windows in North America at home. Maybe not so much in other areas of the world, but in around here, Windows is kind of the king. Now, whether or not you think it's the best, that's a different story. I'm just talking about which one's the most famous. So Windows is one operating system for computers. But then as we scroll, we start to see more and more, like this one called Linux, which not everybody's heard of. And here's Android, which most people heard of because of the phone. iOS, which a lot of people have because of their iPhones. Mac OS, which I am working on right now. That's the operating system for a Mac computer. And then here's just different flavors of Windows, right? So we have Microsoft Windows, and Windows breaks down into Windows 10 and Windows 7, and I could even go further back in Windows, I'm going to date myself, but Windows XP and Windows 98 and Windows 95 and even Windows 3.1, and we go on and on. And if I click here, you'll see there are lots more, and I can click again. There are so many operating systems. We do not have the time to go over all of them, but these are all, a lot of them are Windows, different versions of Windows. And you'll see, for those of you who know Linux, this is a different version of an operating system called Linux. And we keep going and you'll see more and more. And there are a boatload of less famous operating systems out there, each with their own, pros and cons. So I suppose it's a lot like soft drinks. I don't know this. Probably should have looked it up before I made this analogy, but I would venture that maybe Coca-Cola is probably the #1 soft drink out there, but there's all kinds of other flavors that are good, and people like them for whatever reason. Operating systems are similar, right? To any other, this is pretty much any product in the world, right? You're going to have things that are the most popular, and then you're going to have other things that other people prefer for whatever reason. So operating systems are no different. These are all types of operating systems. Interestingly enough, I've talked a lot about Windows and how Windows is kind of the most famous around here, but here's a very interesting graph. I found it very interesting. This is from StatCounter, which is a neat site. If you ever want to waste some time and go learn some stuff, go to StatCounter. But here's a graph of operating system market share. Now here's the key, worldwide. So worldwide, you can see that Windows used to be up over 80% back in 2011, which is pretty darn close to a monopoly. But over time, Windows has gone down and down and down, and you can see it's interesting from about here to here. It's been very even. There hasn't been a lot of increase or decrease in any of these operating systems, but this orange one you're seeing here, that's Android. And the thing about Android is it's free. And so the Android operating system is often what's used on Chromebooks, but it's definitely used on phones. And that's probably the biggest reason that it's increased, is that it's free, it's pretty good, it's made by Google, so it's a reputable company. And so there are lots of people using Windows computers, of course, still. But now that we're starting to think about operating systems, not just on computers, but also on phones, you're seeing Android has really gone way up. And then here's Mac OS. So this is what I'm using with a slow increase. And then the purple one here is, oh, sorry, I lied. That one there is iOS. So that would be for like iPhones. So that's mobile Mac. And then the purple one is OS X. So this is the one that I'm using. So I'm in the vast minority. You can see with only about 5% there, up to about 8% here. And then there's all kinds of other operating systems that people can use. So just an interesting kind of graphical showing of the most popular, influential operating systems around the world. And you can find lots and lots of these graphs around. So now that we've talked about kind of what an operating system is, why you need one, let's talk a little bit more about what an operating system will do for you and why you need one. So here is today's sheet that I'm going to have you read a little bit. I'll just make it a little bigger. Okay. Now, these are the things that operating systems do. I'm going to skip to here, and I want you to kind of keep in mind this diagram. So the typical user will use a computer, and they'll want to get at the hardware. So if I'm using a computer, really at the lowest level, what I want to do is I want to access programs that are on the hardware, right? We talked about how applications and games and all that stuff is saved onto the hard drive. So if I have installed a game and I want to go home and play it, it's on the hard drive of my computer. So what I need to do is I open up an application. When I open up the application, it tells the operating system, hey, I want to access this part of memory in the hard drive or the RAM or whatever it is. And then the hardware sends it back to the operating system and says, okay, give it to the application, and then the user sees it when they're looking in front of their computer or their monitor. So this is the flow. The user tells the program to access the operating system accesses the hardware gives the data back to the operating system, which gives it to the program, which gives it to the user. So when I do something like this, if I hover, you can see my operating system knows to highlight all of these different programs that I have installed on my computer. Right now we're in Microsoft Word, and if I type the letter K, Well, why is it doing that? Well, it's the operating system that interprets that and says, oh, the user is actually typing a key. All those little things we don't think about, the operating system is responsible for that. The operating system is a task scheduler. So the operating system is the part of the operating system that lets you print a document from your word processor while downloading a file in another window and recalculating a spreadsheet in a third. So I can do multiple things on my computer. You can see I have all these windows open over here. And the reason I can have all these things open at the same time is the operating system knows how to allocate resources so that I can have multiple things open. And believe it or not, I'm old enough to remember the days where you could only have one program open at a time. So computers have come a very long way, and now you can do multiple things at once. The operating system also manages your memory. So for example, again, if I have 5 programs open, how does it know how to allocate so much memory to each different program? And it's the operating system does that too. Again, something we don't have to worry about. But the operating system controls the RAM. So if I were to go like this and minimize Microsoft Word, I'm not going to do it, but if I minimized it, then the operating system would take resources out of RAM and put the next thing in there. So if I were to go back to Brave here, my web browser, so it's just kind of loaded into RAM the stuff I need to do this, and then if I minimize, now it's going to load back into RAM the stuff for Microsoft Word. So it's a memory manager. It's a disk manager. So if like I said, when you request a file, everything's on your hard drive. Well, how does it know where it is? It's the operating system that knows where everything is on your hard drive, so that if I click on my music here, it'll open up my music programs, it'll bring up all my music because it knows where it is. It keeps track of all that stuff. It also is what allows me to join a network, which obviously these days there's not a lot you can do on a computer if you're not online. So the fact that I am on a wireless network here, it's the operating system that allows me to do that. Notice, when you turn on a computer these days, you don't have to join a network. It's just on. Well, your operating system does that for you. You're welcome. And then here, other services, the things like the keyboard, the mouse, the video display, that's all your operating system controlling how those things work. And so it manages all of those other things we don't think about. And lastly, security manager, the operating system maintains the security of the information in the computer's files, controlling who can access the computer. So all of these things are essential to how a computer works, and we don't have to think about them. That's because the operating system does it for us, which is pretty fantastic. So now that we've talked about what an operating system will do for you and why you need one, and by the way, when you're building a computer, what happens is you build the computer for the first time, and the very first time you turn it on, you pop the operating system disk into the drive, or these days you would run it off a USB key, or sometimes even install it from the internet. But you would run the installation of the operating system one time and one time only, and then the operating system is installed, and from that point forward, it will take care of everything for you. The equivalent would be if I were to open a restaurant, I might hire a manager, and then that manager is going to take care of everything for me from that point on. Okay? 3 major operating systems that I want to talk about in terms of desktop computing. Notice I said desktop computing, so I'm not talking about mobile at this point, but Windows, Mac, and these two generally everyone's heard of. Everyone's heard of Windows just because of their experience in school or at home. Mac has just made a name for itself for a long time, but now with the iPhone and the iPad, and Mac is pretty famous. I personally like this one better just because I think it performs better, but that's personal opinion. A lot of people like Windows better, and they will get mad at me when I say I like Mac. This one, though, people haven't heard as much about. So Mac and Windows, if I want to use those operating systems, I have to pay. I have to go and buy the product because Apple, Microsoft are they're two companies that they want to make money. Linux is a little different. So I'm going to open up my browser again, and I'm going to type Linux, and I'm going to type the word Ubuntu. And Linux Ubuntu, it's kind of like Linux is, if I were to say Microsoft Windows, the equivalent would be Linux. Linux is like the organization. Ubuntu is the type of operating system. And if I see how it took me straight to ubuntu.com, and I can go over here to download. And I can say, hey, I want to download Ubuntu Desktop. So I click here. Just like that, I am now downloading an operating system. It's going to be a very, very large download. Let's see, it's asking me if I want to save it. I do. And then over here, see if I can see the size of the download. I don't know if I can. It's growing, but the download itself would be quite big, probably a couple of gigabytes. And what I'm doing here is I'm downloading an actual operating system for free, 100% legal. Okay, I'm not pirating anything here. And you can see that there's a way for me to contribute to this, this community. And what this is called open source software. Linux is a group of people who just decided that they wanted everybody to be able to access software for free because it's the right thing to do. And so they've posted their operating system, which is actually quite good, I've used it, for free for people to use. And you can imagine that there are lots of places in the world where there's not a lot of money, and having a free operating system where you can just install it on any computer, anywhere, anytime, is something that's very, very valuable. And so Linux, again, is this open source organization that makes free software for the general public. So then why isn't everybody using it? And the answer is, there are lots of different answers. Windows was here first. Everybody got used to using Windows, so people have stuck with Windows. Some people would argue that when you buy Windows or Mac, you're getting a better product. Now, I personally don't agree with that, but that's opinion. Other people argue that, you know, if I buy Windows or Mac, then I get better tech support if I have a problem. Not sure if that's true either. There's a community here that I can always go to for help if I need it. There's tutorials. It's pretty impressive what they've got going on here. But it is a viable third option in terms of operating systems for a desktop computer. And you can see the biggest thing is simply that Linux is 100% free. It's very, very cool. And if you're thinking, well, it's probably more for hobbyists and people like that, not so. There are some of the biggest computers in the world that run Linux. For example, the New York Stock Exchange, their computers are using Linux because Linux is known for being very, very secure and very, very stable. So, you know, even myself with my Mac, once in a while my Mac will hang and I'll have to restart it. Or with Windows, you may have had to restart Windows or it's crashed on you, and Linux is not known for doing that. It's known for being quite stable. So for this worksheet, what I'd like you to do is kind of use what you've learned in this video and the links here to do a little bit of the pros and cons and find a little bit about, well, what's good about Windows, what's not so good about Windows, and then same thing for the Mac OS, and the same thing for Linux, which we just talked about. So there are some links here that will help you with that. There's also lots here in the documentation when you read through it, and hopefully you've learned some stuff in the video. And then down here, there's just some understanding questions that I'd also like you to do. And then you're going to put this on your website as well. Okay? So, to recap everything, the operating system is the most basic piece of software that you can have on your computer. And software is simply the difference between hardware and software. Sorry, I should have gone over this before. Hardware is something that you can actually physically touch. So for example, everything we've talked about so far is hardware. I can touch the hard drive, I can touch the monitor, I can touch the printer. And the way I often get students to remember it is software can be frustrating because you can't throw it across the room. What I mean by that is, you know, when you get really frustrated with your computer because you know, it crashes or it hangs. Well, I can't take, you know, Microsoft Word or Google Chrome and throw it across the room because it just crashed, because it's software. It's virtual. It doesn't actually exist in our physical world. Whereas I could take my monitor and throw it across the room, but please don't. That's not a good decision, and you're going to waste a lot of money. And the monitor didn't even do anything because technically it's not the monitor's fault that it hung. It's a software problem. So all these people that, you know, hit their computers or be mean to their hardware, they're not doing it right, because it's not actually the physical hardware that's usually the problem. A lot of times it's a software issue where you have poorly written software or something like that. But software, you can't touch it. It only exists virtually. Hardware, you can touch it. It's hard, and that's the difference. So operating system is the most basic piece of software. You have to have it to run your computer because other programs are going to get installed on top of the operating system, and your operating system will do all of these things for you for free, and you don't have to worry about anything else. And then the major operating systems that we're going to talk about for desktop computing are right in here. Okay, so I hope that you've learned a little bit about operating systems.